Hello and welcome to the Malika Writes channel. My name is Malika Writes and today I'm going to be wrapping up the Love in Middle-earth series with Parental Love. So we have spoken about romantic love in Middle-earth, we have spoken about friendship and how that drives the story in Middle-earth. So today we're going to wrap it all up with parental love and look at how the parent-to-child relationship is portrayed in Middle-earth. So in the very beginning, Tolkien establishes how his parent-to-child relationships will sort of function, what a good parent-to-child relationship sort of looks like. So Tolkien was a Christian, and one of the biggest things that comes along when we're looking at parent-to-child relationships is this rule of children, honour thy mother and thy father, or in the case of Aule and Eru, don't try to recreate the children of Ilúvatar and end up making the dwarves and forcing Ilúvatar to sort of adopt the dwarves as his children. Don't do that. So when we're looking at the relationship between Aule and Eru, which is our first sort of parent-to-child relationship that we get access to in the Silmarillion, what we see between the two of them is this loving relationship. It's one of correction and guidance. So the Valar, the Ainur as they were called at the time, they are young at that point. They grew, it's just said that they grew but slowly in knowledge, not only of their skill but also of their siblings' skills, and they relied on Eru to provide them with knowledge and to sort of guide them, which is the dynamic that we have with children and their parents. So we have two characters at the sort of the beginning of the Silmarillion that we can contrast. So Aule and Melkor, the main villain, they are made deliberately similar. We have Aule, who becomes impatient and falters, yet is apologetic and willing to be corrected. Then we have Melkor, who is too proud to receive correction and thus he falls. This is the same story that we find in the biblical tradition with Lucifer, how he was too proud and envious, and that was the reason for his fall. So to bring this into human terms, what we have is a parent, Eru, with a lot more experience. And even though humans aren't all-knowing, but because your parent has lived longer, they've had more life experience, they've just gone through a lot more, they've seen how to function decently, they've seen how to function within the system that you have been born into. For that reason, their role is to guide and to correct. The place of the child is to receive that guidance and that correction. And that's what we see with Aule and with Melkor. Melkor isn't willing to receive that correction, but Aule is, and that's why his dwarves are adopted by Eru. And he's not punished as severely as Melkor was punished. So another theme from sort of lifted from the Bible that we see in Tolkien's work that has to do with parent and child relationships is this idea of parents do not provoke your children to anger. The most obvious example that we can just lift from the Silmarillion has to be Fëanor, who quite literally provokes a significant part of the Noldor to anger, and which is what spirals everything out of control, and that's part of the reason why we even have the Silmarillion, because Fëanor was able to whip up this storm of emotion. But I also want to just stay on Fëanor for a second, because a lot of the time Fëanor's actions are actually a little bit misunderstood. His motivations for going after Melkor are sometimes misunderstood, and it's blamed solely on his love for the Silmarils. However, there's more to this story. Tolkien was very deliberate about the details that he put in, and he chose to mention Fëanor's love for his father a big part of the reason why Fëanor was so rash in his decision making and the things that he did after the Silmarils were stolen was because his father was the first elf to be murdered. His father was murdered by Melkor, and that grief is what caused him to go on this rampage and to do a little bit of kinslaying on his own. So it's not just his love of the Silmarils, though that definitely had, it was definitely a big part of his motivations, but the death of his father was, I feel, perhaps the greater motivation. I feel that perhaps the death of his father was what cut him the most deeply and what sort of justified, in his mind, that level of violence. Because the only other times that we've seen Fëanor be violent is when his relationship with his father was threatened, when he thought that Fingolfin was coming between him and his father. He went and created a sword and threatened his half-brother with the sword. That's the first time that we see Fëanor actually threaten violence and, really try to make use of a deadly weapon. The only other time is when that said father has been killed. So I think when we're looking at Fëanor and Finwë's relationship, and it's mentioned repeatedly that Fëanor loved his father and that Finwë loved his son, we do see this. We do get a glimpse of the father and son relationship just in a sentence or two, but those sentences were put there deliberately for us to pay attention to the fact that Fëanor wasn't just this rampaging, jewel-loving, crazy man. He was a man grieving his father, whom he loved. And even though his actions can't be justified by his grief, but it humanizes him in a way that I feel like we haven't necessarily talked about too much. And that's another great example of a parent-to-child relationship, albeit it sort of went wrong and led to the death of a lot of people. But they loved each other, which is a great thing. So, another example of not provoking your child to anger is Eol. In the Fall of Gondolin, where we sort of meet Eol and his family and get more details about them, Maeglin and his mother, Arethel, they return to Gondolin. And Eol chases after them and subsequently kills Arethel. It's a whole messy situation. When Eol arrives in Gondolin, he tries to provoke his son to anger. He tries to goad his son into having an outburst, into doing something that would almost justify Eol's actions. But Maeglin remains stony-faced and doesn't really do anything. But that's an example of a parent trying to provoke their child to anger by doing things that deliberately make that child angry, that bring up negative emotions. And that Eol is partly to blame for Maeglin's cold disposition. Eol, to be honest, serves as an example of just what not to do in life. Don't back your love interest into a corner and then propose marriage to her. Don't isolate her from her family. Don't create an atmosphere so stifling that your wife and child run away from you. And don't try to kill your son when he refuses to come back home. The simple things, the things that don't really take much brain work to figure out. But apparently Eol couldn't do that. But with Eol and Maeglin, we have an example of a parent-to-child relationship that wasn't healthy, and it led, in part, to the fall of Gondolin, which was a very tragic event. Yes, it led to the union of one of my favourite couples, Eärendil and Elwing, but it was still a very tragic event that didn't need to happen if Eol had just been a more respectful elf in general, if he had just been less proud. Another great example of parent to child relationships that we get in the Silmarillion, and this one is a more complex one because we get a lot of detail about this particular relationship. It's the relationship between Thingol and Luthien. Thingol just comes across as the very protective dad, as Luthien's his little princess and no one is good enough for her. And I mean, we all kind of know that there are very few people in Middle-earth that could have deserved Luthien. But what we see of his relationship is complicated. Because Thingol, personally, for me, is one of my favourite characters. I think he's just a really well-written character. We hear about him first from his friendship with Finwë, who was Fëanor's father, and we learn how he saw the light of Valinor in Melion's face, and he was content with remaining in Middle-earth and not returning to Valinor. We hear of his dealings with the dwarves and how his kingdom was built. He's a very central figure in the Silmarillion, and his daughter also plays a huge part in the Silmarillion, so it just makes sense that her whole backstory has been built throughout the entirety of the book. So what we see of Thingol and Luthien's relationship is that they have a close relationship, because after Luthien departs from the world for the second time, Thingol is distraught. He's torn up about it. He's not the same. He's lost his daughter. You could tell that he cares very much for her. He makes some dodgy decisions now and again. He's not perfect. I mean, he locks her in a tower like Rapunzel to stop her running off with a boy he doesn't approve of, a boy he doesn't think is worthy of her. I think a lot of fathers could sympathise with Thingol, especially when they have daughters. So he's not a villain. He's not a character that is like Eeyore. But he does have his moments where he's not the wisest. What we see of their relationship is one that's very close. And it's really cute when you think about it, because we have this father sort of daughter relationship, and we don't really get so much of a close look the way that we do with Thingol and Luthien into the other relationships that come a little bit later. For example, Elwing and her children, we don't really get what their relationship was like. I've explained what I think of Elwing's decision to jump into the sea with the Silmaril and what might have been going through her mind at the time. I think she didn't know that her children were alive at that point, because Maedhros and Maglor had pretty much slaughtered a very large number of the inhabitants of the Havens. So I don't think she knew that her children were alive at that point. And so her decision to jump into the sea with the Silmaril, to me, felt like an act of, well, you've taken my children and my home and my people, so I'm going to take what you treasure the most. And that's where I think her mindset was. So it makes her character that I find very endearing. And I think it shows a glimpse of perhaps her love for her children. That being said, we don't really get a lot. We get more mentioned about Maglor and Elros and Elrond than we do with Elrond and Elros's actual parents. Even though we just get a brief line, to be honest, we're told that at first the twins didn't like their captors. I mean, if you've come and killed everybody I know and you've sort of pseudo-adopted me, I'm probably not going to like you either. But eventually they grew to love each other, which I think is one of the cutest things ever. Not killing people and then kidnapping children, that bit's dodgy. But the whole adopted family sort of just making the most of this terrible scenario that they're in is really cute, and I think a lot of fans love that relationship. I've seen a lot of fan art that explores that relationship and really tries to imagine what that would have been like, because we're only given this sort of really small, tantalizing detail, and then we're left with nothing. It's not really expanded on in a way that the fans would appreciate, in a way that I would definitely appreciate. But you know, I'm satisfied with how the Silmarillion is. I don't need anything added to it. So the last relationship, parent-to-child relationship, that I wanted to talk about today is probably the most famous. If you've never read the books, you will still know this relationship because a big deal is made about it in the Lord of the Rings movies and also in the books. So the relationship between Owen and Elrond. I think everyone felt for Elrond when he had to give up his daughter, because anyone who's read the Silmarillion will feel even more for him, because you know the backstory and you know that Elrond's twin brother, became mortal and died, and so Elrond has had to feel the pain of losing someone to mortality. His parents in Valinor, at least, you know, he will see them again when he goes into the West. But his brother, until the end of everything, he will not see his brother again. And that was the fate that his daughter was going to, well, she did take. So I think anyone reading the Silmarillion, anyone coming in to the Lord of the Rings and seeing that dynamic would have really felt for him. In the movies, there's this cute moment between the two of them where Elrond asks, do I not also have your love? Which is, I felt that meant a lot more when I read the Silmarillion, because knowing Elrond's past and knowing everything that he's gone through, the loss of his daughter would feel a lot more impactful if you have that information. It was a great scene and very impactful regardless of whether you know the backstory or not, but it just becomes so much more heart-wrenching when you actually know the backstory. And I think that the movies did a brilliant job of portraying Elrond and Owen's relationship, because we really do get this close father-daughter relationship. We see them holding hands, we see them hugging, we see them together. In the books, they're sitting next to each other. We know that in the books that they've been apart for a while because Arwen was with her grandmother Galadriel. We see this lovely relationship between the two of them, and it's conveyed in small ways, which I think sticks very true to the books, because in the books we don't get a whole bunch of details. We just get these small one-line sentences that give us an idea. One thing about Tolkien is that in some parts he goes into so much detail, it's like you're looking at a photograph, and in other parts all you get is an artist's sketch. And he does it so well that you don't mind either way. So you have this lovely tension of knowing exactly what's going on and everything that's happening and all the details, and then not knowing enough and wanting to keep reading everything he's written in order to know more. That's how you build up a collection of Tolkien books. So I'm going to sort of end the video here, because I think that we have thoroughly explored the relationships in Middle-earth. If there's anything else that you would like to know about, then just let me know in the comment section. At the end of the day, this channel is as much yours as it is mine. And I actually like it this way because the interaction is great, answering your questions and just kind of giving you the content that you would be interested in watching is a good thing for me. So thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope that you have a lovely day. This has been the Malika Writes channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to know when I post, and yeah, have a lovely day.